So Shlomo, who we talked about earlier, he would say depression is best treated by stories, dancing, laughter, and music, and creativity, and connectedness. He said the best treatment is being hugged. But trying to ask somebody, well, your problem is you're not meditating enough, or you're not praying hard enough, they don't recommend that. Because if you were able to do it, you wouldn't be depressed. So that was the whole revolution. That whole Hasidic, Kabbalistic movement was that people had become too rigid in their interpretations. They became fundamentalist, too much over to the left, and they forgot how to celebrate. And that's where the father of the Hasidic, the great Kabbalist, the Baal Shem Tov, said, and nobody really got it, said a prostitute living on the streets that's full of joy is closer to God, to the creation, than the greatest scholar locked in themselves in a room. It's way ahead. That the key is joy. Otherwise we get locked into our own pain. And remember, they were convinced that the pain is the fertilizer. So it's not something to fear. And my experience is that when we're no longer afraid of our feelings and we're no longer afraid of our pain and suffering, it goes through very quickly. Because all it's doing is fertilizing the process. It's when we interpret it and give it meaning that it becomes more and more diffuse and taking on an identity that it was not part of its original identity. And lo and behold, it was, I forget how many years ago, the research came out that people that suffered from war wounds, post-traumatic stress, the worst thing you can do is have them keep talking about it. They stopped, the guidelines were no longer to have people talk about their experience, but override it. I mean, that was this psychological recommendations. And that's the same thing the Kabbalah said hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Get them go out of themselves, get them celebrate, get them dancing, get them contributing, get them keeping part of the community. Have them eat meals, have them spend the Sabbath together, have them mix medicines, all those things, and that's the solution. So we went from the healing process from when you decide that you're determined to put the pieces back together. We went from this level, and we went back from the soul level to the Yesod, which is the foundation, which is the reality that where we come from has, and all the things that have happened to us is not connected to our true identity. And too many of us become the definition of the events that happen to us. So if bad things happen to us, we think that our response to those bad things is who we are. Or God forbid we come down with a disease, or we come from a dysfunctional family, or we become victims of different things that's something because for some reason we're flawed, or something is wrong with us. And the Kabbalists would say that on healing, you have to really heal, you have to discard that notion. That's just a response to the events in your life. It's not the response to yourself. And that's not your identity. And then the next stage is idea from the archetypical level is that we have to actively, because you remember on the right side, and this is the right side, we have to be active in I call it negotiation, but it's really what are you willing to do to change things? And it has to be active. It's not sitting around waiting for something to happen. It's when you're really going to make a decision. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do yoga. I'm going to do meditation. I'm going to do, what am I going to do to get me back on track? Because, and then the next level would be the internal level, where once you make those decisions, then you've generated enough energy that you can allow passively to what's suppressed in you, that's been damaging you, to become conscious, because nothing that becomes unconscious can be healed until it becomes conscious. And that's just letting it go, letting it rip. Letting it come to the surface and just, don't interpret it, don't give it value, don't give it meaning. It's all the things that you aren't unable to integrate that needs to become conscious. And you have to have the faith and trust that that's part of the process. And then when you finish that process, then you go to the next level. And that's where it becomes like a bridge from Netzach, and that's the level of the internal process of allowing the unconscious to surface, and you go to grief. And a lot of people think grief is sadness, but grief is the emotional content of what's lost forever. And that's a great definition of suffering. The frustration of knowing things you know now. You said, how many of us have said, if I knew then what I knew now, I would have done things differently. I would have made different choices. I would have, or if I was treated differently, or if I had parents that really truly understood me and loved me and were there for me. And that's grief. Because if you really want to heal, you can't stay there, but you have to go through that. Because what that is, the things that you are fixated on, especially the traumas that have happened to you, become your definition, because grief is the same level of definition. Of distinctions. And then when that's finished, on a human level, you go through a process of gratitude, acceptance, release, and forgiveness. The Kabbalists always maintain release and forgiveness are actually the same thing. And a lot of people thinking forgiveness is saying that it was okay that this happened to me, I'm not going to hold on to it, we're okay, we're whole and all that. And the Kabbalists would say that's nonsense. That a lot of that is even beyond ourselves. If you, the example I heard from a Kabbalist was, if you get angry with somebody and he's a shoemaker and you chop off his hand and he can't support his family because he can't fix shoes, you don't have the ability that the person that happened to them can't give forgiveness to the perpetrator because it affected more than the person that had his hand cut off. I mean, it affected all the people who didn't get their shoes fixed, first of all, but also his family and his great family. Everybody, it becomes an action that takes on its own life. And the forgiveness has to come through a reintegration, healing process with the original source. And Jewish law is based on leaving somebody whole. So it's not, a lot of people don't understand law, that American law is built on, comes from the Roman law, which was the better people were the property owners, and that we had to protect people's property. That's how the British, the Magna Carta, and the British biblical law, or the interpretation of biblical law, was to do our best to leave somebody whole. So if you find a way to take away the effects of somebody else's sin and leave that person whole, then forgiveness takes place. But if it's something that takes on a life of its own, you have to deal with a higher authority. So when that happens, when that gratitude, acceptance, release, and forgiveness, it generates, the next stage is love. It's really the love of all creation, of the ability to self-sacrifice, of to give of yourself without expecting or needing anything in return. The way a mother creates gives birth to a child. And the next stage is Tiferet, which is the level of compassion, and that is the level of a deeper forgiveness. Not the same as a release, but an ability to allow evolution to continue. The process to re-continue. And that is also the level of what they call splendor, or beauty, of grace, of all these things. And the way I would look at it, it's the compassion for everything that's wrong, to embody a process that's going to guide others to self-correct. So to bring things back to center. And so to eliminate the sin is basically to eliminate the causes of dysregulation. So remember the left and right system. So at this level of love, it's an internal process. The level of grief is an external process. And then at this level, it's a centering process. So the next level is the spiritual level. So if you remember correctly, in the tree in the creation, what takes place over here? Anybody remember?
I don't. Is that the 0 point field and non-existence, pure potential?
No, that's up higher up. At this point would be the void. Yeah, it would also be the level of Tzimtzum. It's the level of something becoming bigger than it by becoming smaller. And it's the level, it's called Binah. So that's where the contraction of existence, remember, everything emerges out of the Nikudah. So the connection between these two would be emptiness, meaning that there's no form anymore. It's become one again. Remember what happened here at the mental level? What happens when it's coming down? It splits into dualism. So in order to heal, it has to become one again. So the higher world, so they would call it, in Buddhism they call it bliss. And I'm trying to remember how to translate Yechid, which would be oneness. So here in the healing page, it becomes focus, single-minded focus to become one again. So to return from dualism. So no longer separation. And why do we need separation according to the Kabbalists? To have function. You can't function to create consciousness without separation. But to heal, you have to get reconnected again. And Isaac Luria called it the Yechid, the oneness.
And that's only practice with observation and undoing.
No, well, that begins by non-doing down here.
Mm-hmm.
Observation would be at this level, right over here.
And when we say observation, it's emotionally neutral, it's completely neutral, and just observing
That's the mental level.
mental level.
Yeah, and that's the creation process. So when you come back, is at